joined by Matt Continetti. Matt is the head of domestic studies at the American Enterprise Institute, a columnist for the Washington Free Beacon, and of course for Commentary Magazine, where he also appears most days on Commentary's podcast. Good morning, Matt. How are you?
Good morning, Hugh. I'm well. Hope you're well, too.
I am. Now, because I know you wrote the book, The Right, you know the intellectual history of the conservative movement and of the Republican Party. And you know American politics generally. So if I tell you Gerald Ford and Poland, Michael Dukakis and the tank, George H.W. Bush and looking at the watch, Mitt Romney and 47%, that all makes sense to you, right?
Absolutely. Those are signature moments in American politics, and they swung elections, I think.
I think we may have had one yesterday. I want to play for you cut number 2, Kamala Harris on The View.
Well, if anything, would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
So, Matt Continetti, one more statistic before I ask you to comment on that. Real Clear Politics does an aggregator of the right direction, wrong direction, usually viewed as the key determinant of an election. Right now in America, 28.4% of the people think we're going in the right direction. 61.3% say we are going in the wrong direction. And Kamala Harris just put a bear hug around the wrong direction. What did you make of her answer?
Well, I think she didn't seem prepared to answer the question, which is odd, since she's the Democratic nominee for president, and you'd expect that she would know some of the questions that a friendly interview would give her. Now, the second thing is it was a bad answer, Hugh, because it cuts against her presentation as a change candidate in a change election. As you say, most Americans are unhappy with the direction of the country. Joe Biden continues to be deeply unpopular as a president among the American people. We don't talk about it much because he's no longer on the ticket, but he has not gained in popularity or favorability since he withdrew from the race. So you would expect Kamala Harris to want to separate herself from Biden's presidency and create a new identity, a new political identity that's more oriented toward change. She refuses to do that. And so she was quite blunt in the answer to The View. And then she gave the similar answer to Colbert later yesterday evening, that she wouldn't do anything differently. I think this is a boon for the Trump campaign.
It is. I think it is a moment like Dukakis in the tank or George W. Bush looking at his watch. Everything just fine. Let's start, Matt, and go through it. What could she said about Afghanistan? Because there's a lot of field there that not just Abbey Gate. You can talk about abandoning Bagram without telling anyone. You can talk about originally setting the date for 9/11, changing it to 8/31. You can talk about the SIV. What would she said about Afghanistan?
Well, even if she agreed with Biden's decision to withdraw on the timetable that Biden set out in agreement with the Taliban, she could have said easily that we should have been more prepared for the Taliban's assault on Kabul, and that we should have had more assets in Afghanistan to aid the evacuation, that we should have done everything we could to secure Bagram and to get our allies out and our people out. But instead, she's very close to Biden. She continues to say that not only that was the right decision to withdraw in the way that we withdrew, but that it was a courageous decision. And that's not how I see it at all.
And that she was the last person in the room to discuss it with him.
Right.
Let's turn to Ukraine. What might she have said that she would have done differently about Ukraine than Joe Biden?
Well, this one is pretty easy. All she needs to say is, look, we need to get the weapons to Ukraine faster. We should have not delayed the delivery of important systems, whether it's Patriots, whether it's ATACMS, whether it's the Abrams tanks, whether it's the F-16s. And she could say, look, under my administration, I'm not going to restrict the use of these platforms. That China doesn't restrict the use of the weapons and technology they're providing Russia. Iran doesn't restrict the use of the missiles that they provide Russia that are fired into Ukraine. Why should America and the West restrict the use of the weapons we're giving our ally in its defense for its very existence? That's a pretty easy answer, I think, one she does not give.
There's another set of easy answers on policy towards Israel, what might she have said about how she would deal with Israel differently?
Well, here, Hugh, I'm going to take a moment and actually advocate plagiarism because all Kamala Harris needs to do is plagiarize J.D. Vance's answer at the vice presidential debate, an answer he gave at a pro Israel rally earlier this week commemorating October 7th and memorializing the victims of the terrorist attack. I think J.D. Vance puts it very well. Israel's a good guy. Israel's our friend. Israel should be able to do what it feels is necessary to ensure its survival and to protect the Jewish people. That's all Kamala Harris needs to say. And she doesn't need to even credit J.D. Vance. I would be happy if she just stole the words from his mouth.
I too would agree with that. She stole the no tax on tips, so she's welcome to that.
Yeah,
She could
exactly.
also say, "Well, I shouldn't have said. I've studied the maps. We ought not to have held them back from Rafah. It turns out that was an important operation, and they did move 1 million people without serious injury or humanitarian crisis. But the easiest thing in the world is, I don't think we would have done the pier under President Harris because the pier sunk.
Right.
I
Forgot
mean, isn't
about the
that the
pier.
most obvious?
I blocked it. Yes, the total disaster of the humanitarian pier, a symbol for Biden's really clumsy and I think harmful handling of the Israel and Middle East issues over the past 10 months.
Well, let's also talk about the border now. We've had at least 10 million people cross it. In fiscal year 23, 3.2 million is the ICE number, and the estimates vary between 10 and 15 million people have entered the country illegally in the last 3.5, 4 years. She'd have done nothing differently, Matt Continetti. What could she say about the border that she would have done differently?
Well, it was remarkable in her interview with 60 Minutes on Monday to have the CBS News correspondent, Bill Whitaker, basically give Harris the answer, give her an opportunity to say, oh, maybe we shouldn't have reversed all of the immigration orders as rapidly as we did on day one of this administration, or maybe we should have reversed our own position and addressed this through executive order, which we said we couldn't do for years, but we finally did this past summer, and there has been some decline in the unauthorized illegal crossings at the southern border. She had every opportunity to say those things, but she couldn't. And Whitaker, I believe, offered her 3 or 4 chances in follow up to give some sign that she recognized what a colossal error in judgment it was to open the border on the first day of the Biden administration. And Harris just cannot admit it. She doesn't recognize there's a problem, or she's offended to think that it's a problem. And she now pretends that everything is under control. Um, this is remarkable. Hugh, the bottom line here is these interviews are conducted by friendly reporters. In many cases, I think handpicked by Harris's campaign, and yet she cannot rise to the occasion. Every single interview she does, I think, harms her cause even further.
Your colleague Abe Greenwald, best known for saying it's worse than that, is also known for saying interviews are her kryptonite. And Abe is right. Back to the everything is fine that happened, I'm all for it. China. She could have talked about the spy balloons. She could have said we should have stood with Jimmy Lai earlier. We should have talked about the Uyghurs. We should have had one message on Taiwan. Joe Biden's had 6. On 3 occasions, he said we would defend Taiwan. On 3 occasions, he's walked it back. She could say something about that. What could she say about China? That we would have shot the spy balloon down earlier if she'd been in charge?
A pretty easy difference. It would show that she is willing to use force, which is, a test for any wannabe commander in chief. And remember her convention speech, where she kind of said that she wouldn't hesitate to defend the United States and our allies. One of the stronger moments of a speech that now seems kind of lost in the midst of time. But, it's something that you've been talking a lot about, Hugh. China is the missing issue of this campaign. There's a lot of talk about culture, there's a lot of talk about economics. Harris rolls out a new middle class entitlement every other day, it seems. But the major issue confronting us in the next 25 years, the rise of the People's Republic of China, its power, its attempts to subvert the West and democracy, its effects on global trade. and American workers. These issues, I think, have been neglected, and it's something that whoever wins will have to deal with very soon after taking office.
She also did not separate herself from any of the spending of the Biden administration. They have spent $8 trillion of debt. So our debt has increased $8 trillion. The best thing to look at is the debt when Trump left and the debt today, and it's $8 trillion more. Trump wasn't great on spending control either. But this spending came after the COVID spending and unleashed, as Bill Whitaker billboarded for her, 25% inflation in groceries alone. Should she have picked something on spending, Matt? Anything at all? Because she's going to spend the same amount of money, apparently.
Well, she's going to spend maybe more with all these new plans she's rolling out. And as Bill Whitaker asked in the 60 Minutes interview, how are you going to pay for it? She couldn't answer the question, given, again, multiple opportunities. Here's another issue that we're not talking about in the campaign. The debt is now more than $35 trillion. We just got word this morning that the deficit for the past year was $1.8 trillion, almost a $2 trillion deficit. The spending's on autopilot. And as you say, Biden has made it worse by loading up the federal budget with these spending plans, whether it was the rescue plan that was unnecessary and that many economists said would overheat the economy and cause inflation, which happened, whether it was the huge infrastructure bill, the Chips and Science Act, then, of course, the huge so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which was just a green energy boondoggle disguised as some type of economic program. They've made the problem worse, and Harris is not talking about how she would address it as president. And to say, oh, we're going to make the rich pay more in taxes is not an answer, because there aren't enough rich to cover the debt. We're now at a place, Hugh, where service on the debt, money that just exists because of the debt we've accrued and interest rates that have gone up during the Biden administration, is now outpacing our defense budget and our expenditures on Medicaid. This is a big problem.
Oh, it's insane. And she wouldn't do anything
country
differently. I'm going to talk
Yeah.
with you for 5 minutes during the break, Matt. Stand by for a moment. America, if you're voting for Kamala Harris after that answer on The View yesterday, you are voting for decline. You're embracing decline and eclipsed by the People's Republic of China in such a fashion that we will never catch up again if you vote for Kamala Harris. I'm going to talk with Matt after the break about one more thing, which is personnel standby. Matt, I just want to spend a couple more minutes on something that the vice president said yesterday. She wouldn't change a thing. She's been in on all the major decisions. That means Tony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, Janet Yellen, Lloyd Austin, Merrick Garland. It means KJP of all. Maybe we get 4 more years of KJP if she wins. Should she have separated? At some time, I think later in the night on Colbert, she said we're different people, obviously. That's not an answer. Can anyone actually vote for her in good conscience after she said, I'm doing everything the same? It's like willing ourselves into decline.
There's one reason people want to vote for Hugh, and that's because she's not Donald Trump. And that's about a little bit less than half the country. And this is why this race is so close. But I want to talk about the personnel for a moment, because in one of her answers on The View, after saying there was nothing she would change, she came back to it and said, you know what, I'm going to have she realized that she's promised she's to have a Republican in her cabinet, but she won't say which Republican. And that's apparently the only difference between the Biden years and the possible Harris years that could be in our future.
Yeah. Matt, I want to close on that conversation I had with President Trump on Monday. The only thing they knew I was going to talk about was Israel, because I requested the interview for 10/7. And he said, and I was glad to hear it, Israel has a right to take a shot. They enjoy a right to retaliate. I applaud that. The future Prime Minister of Canada said the same thing. I don't think Team Biden wants Israel to do anything. They don't want them to hit the oil platforms, the oil storage, the IRGC headquarters, and especially what they should go for, because the door is open, are the nuclear sites. What do you think of her and him on this?
Well, I think it's a travesty, Hugh. I think if there's anything that needs to be done right now, it's the United States needs to stand with Israel in its potential retaliation for the second direct ballistic missile attack from Iran in 6 months. Biden's reasoning here is a mystery to me. He's allowed our enemies to dominate the escalation ladder in both Ukraine and the Middle East. And this is decline. There's no doubt about it. What he should be standing with our allies, and he should be coordinating with our allies, not yelling at Israel for not telling the United States what they're planning to do. Why is Israel not telling the United States what they're planning to do? Because they know that the United States will leak it and try to stop it. That is not a situation we need to be in right now. I thought President Trump's answer was strong, and I think that the difference between the candidates on this question, do we stand with Israel in the Middle East? Do we actually take this opportunity to clamp down on the Islamic Republic of Iran and its nuclear program, and maybe actually help the Iranian people end this terrible terrorist sponsoring regime? I think the difference between the two candidates is clear at this point.
One last thing. We have a minute, Matt. Assault is occurring all over the United States against Jewish students and against supporters of Israel that are in the streets by people carrying Hamas and Hezbollah flags. The Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division, and the Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Education should be all over this. She didn't say a word about that. It's as though it doesn't exist in her world. Are you shocked that the vice president doesn't care about that? 30 seconds, Matt.
I'm shocked, but I also see her doing everything she can to reach out and to appease the Muslim American and Arab American communities in Michigan. This is politics. I think it's basest, and I don't think it's helping her at all. I don't think she's winning either community, Jewish Americans or Muslim Americans, out of this. And I think it helps President Trump close the gap in some of these states in the final weeks.
I hope you're right. Matt Continetti, follow him on X at Continetti. Listen to the commentary pod every day. Read him at the Washington Free Beacon whenever he writes a piece. Thank you, Matt.